In the heart of New York City, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and dreams were as big as the city itself, there was a small yet charming restaurant tucked away on a quiet street. It wasn't fancy or flashy. It didn't have crystal chandeliers or velvet curtains, but it had something special: warmth. The kind of warmth that came from people who worked hard every day just to make ends meet. Emily Carter was one such person. She was in her mid-20s, with curly brown hair tied back into a messy bun and eyes that carried both exhaustion and determination. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise, made sure her mother's medicine was ready for the day, and then headed to work at the little restaurant. Her life revolved around two things: taking care of her sick mother and surviving paycheck to paycheck. Her mother, Sophia, had been Emily's rock growing up. A single parent who juggled odd jobs while raising her daughter, Sophia always found ways to bring joy into their modest home. But now, years later, roles had reversed. Sophia was bedridden due to an illness that drained not only her health but also their savings. Emily did everything she could. She picked up extra shifts, skipped meals when money was tight, and even sold some of her belongings online. Yet no matter how hard she tried, the bills kept piling up. The restaurant where Emily worked was bustling most evenings, filled with customers ranging from office workers grabbing dinner after long hours to wealthy businessmen enjoying fine dining without breaking a sweat. For Emily, serving tables was more than just a job. It was her lifeline. Each tip meant another prescription refill or a warm meal for her mom. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky orange, a man walked into the restaurant. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, and carried himself with an air of authority. His presence commanded attention, and heads turned as he made his way to a corner table. This wasn't someone you'd forget easily. He exuded power and confidence, traits that seemed almost otherworldly compared to the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Emily glanced at him briefly, trying not to stare too long. She recognized him immediately. Who wouldn't? Alexander Sterling was a name everyone knew. A self-made billionaire, he had built an empire from scratch, earning admiration and envy in equal measure. Magazines often featured him on their covers, calling him a visionary leader. But tonight, sitting alone at his table, he looked surprisingly ordinary, just a man having dinner like anyone else. As Emily approached his table to take his order, she felt a mix of nervousness and curiosity. "Good evening, sir," she said politely, clutching her notepad tightly. "What can I get you?" Alexander barely looked up from the menu. "Steak, medium rare, and a glass of red wine," he replied, curtly, his tone clipped and businesslike. There was no smile, no acknowledgement of her beyond what was necessary. Emily nodded quickly and scribbled down the order, used to dealing with difficult customers. Throughout the meal, Alexander remained focused, scrolling through emails on his phone between bites. He didn't engage much with anyone, not even when Emily brought his food or refilled his drink. To him, this place was likely just another stop in his busy schedule, a temporary setting until he moved on to bigger and better things. When he finished eating, Alexander left cash on the table, including a generous tip, and stood up to leave. Emily watched him go, thankful for the extra money but feeling slightly unsettled by how distant he seemed. Most patrons, even those who weren't particularly friendly, at least acknowledged her existence. But Alexander? It was as if she were invisible. It was only after he stepped out of the restaurant that Emily noticed something unusual: a black leather wallet lying forgotten on the chair where Alexander had been sitting. Frowning, she picked it up and flipped it open, intending to check for identification so she could return it to him. What she found inside stopped her cold. There, tucked behind a stack of credit cards and receipts, was a faded photograph. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable. An old picture of a young woman smiling brightly against a backdrop of trees. But as Emily stared closer, her breath caught in her throat. That face, those eyes, they belonged to someone she knew all too well, her mother. For a moment, Emily couldn't move. Her mind raced with questions. How could this be? Why would a man like Alexander Sterling carry around a photo of her mother? Was it possible they knew each other? If so, why had her mother never mentioned him? Before she could think any further, the restaurant door swung open and Alexander reappeared. His expression shifted from annoyance to relief when he saw Emily holding his wallet. "I thought I lost it," he muttered, reaching out to take it back. But Emily hesitated. Clutching the wallet tightly, she looked up at him, her voice trembling, slightly. "Hi, sir," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Why is my mother's picture in your wallet?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded with implications. Alexander froze, his hand still extended toward the wallet. For a brief second, surprise flickered across his face, followed by something deeper, something Emily couldn't quite place. Regret? Longing? Whatever it was, it made her heart race. Alexander started, then paused, seemingly unsure of how to respond. Finally, he sighed and gestured for her to sit down. "Let me explain." And just like that, the stage was set for a story neither of them could have anticipated, one that would unravel secrets buried deep in the past and change their lives forever. Alexander gestured for Emily to sit down. His usual calm demeanor cracked just enough to reveal a flicker of vulnerability. The restaurant buzzed around them, plates clinking, laughter echoing. But Emily felt like the world had narrowed to this one moment. She sat across from him, clutching the wallet in her hands as if it held all the answers she'd been searching for. For a long time, Alexander didn't say anything. He stared at the table, his fingers tapping lightly against the polished wood. Finally, he looked up, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made Emily's heart skip a beat. "Your mother," he began slowly, "was someone very important to me once." Emily blinked, unsure of what to make of his words. Important? What did that even mean? She leaned forward slightly, her curiosity outweighing her hesitation. "How do you know her?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Alexander took a deep breath, as though preparing himself for something difficult. Then he started talking, his voice low and measured, like he was recounting a story he hadn't told in years. "We grew up together," he said, "in a small town outside the city. Back then, life was simpler, harder in some ways, but simpler too." He went on to explain how they had met as kids. His family wasn't wealthy, they were barely scraping by, and Sophia's family wasn't much better off. But despite their struggles, Sophia had always been full of light. She dreamed of becoming an artist, spending hours sketching in notebooks, or painting murals on scraps of cardboard. Meanwhile, Alexander worked odd jobs after school, determined to build a better future for himself and those he cared about. Their friendship blossomed into something deeper over time. They became inseparable, sharing secrets, hopes, and dreams under the stars. For a while, it seemed like nothing could tear them apart. But life had other plans. "When I graduated high school," Alexander continued, his voice tinged with regret, "I got an opportunity to study abroad. It was a chance I couldn't pass up, a way out of the cycle of poverty we were trapped in. But," he paused, swallowing hard, "I left without saying goodbye." Emily's eyes widened. "You just left?" she asked, her tone sharp with disbelief. "It wasn't that simple," Alexander replied, shaking his head. "I wanted to tell her, I really did. But I was scared of failing, scared of disappointing her. So I convinced myself it was better this way, better to leave quietly than risk ruining what we had." But his decision came at a cost. By the time he returned to the States years later, Sophia had moved on. She had married someone else and started a family. When Alexander finally tracked her down, it was clear she had found happiness elsewhere. Heartbroken but unwilling to disrupt her life, he chose to step back and let her be. "That photo," he said, pointing to the faded image still resting in Emily's hand, "is the last reminder I have of her, of us. I kept it because sometimes people hold on to things not because they want to go back, but because they need to remember where they came from." Emily listened intently, her mind racing as she tried to process everything he was saying. Her mother had never mentioned any of this. Sure, Sophia often spoke fondly of her childhood, but she always glossed over details about her teenage years. Now it made sense. Why her mother would sometimes stare wistfully at old photographs or hum songs from decades ago. There was a whole chapter of her life Emily knew nothing about. "Why didn't she ever tell me?" Emily whispered, more to herself than to him. "Maybe she thought it didn't matter anymore," Alexander suggested gently. "Or maybe she didn't want you to feel like you had to carry her past. Some memories are meant to stay private." The weight of his words settled over Emily, leaving her both intrigued and conflicted. On one hand, she felt a strange sense of connection to this man sitting across from her, a man who clearly cared deeply for her mother. On the other hand, there was a lingering sadness, a sense of loss for stories untold and moments missed. After a long silence, Emily finally spoke. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. I don't know what to think right now." Alexander nodded, understanding flashing in his eyes. "Take your time," he said. "And if you ever want to talk more or ask anything, I'm here." As Emily stood up to leave, clutching the wallet tightly, she glanced back at him one last time. There was so much she still didn't understand, so many questions swirling in her mind. But one thing was certain. This chance encounter had opened a door to a part of her mother's life she never knew existed, and somehow she couldn't shake the feeling that it was only the beginning of something bigger. Later that night, as Emily lay awake in bed, her thoughts kept circling back to Alexander. Who was he really? A billionaire CEO with a cold exterior? Yes, but also someone who carried a piece of her mother's past close to his heart. Someone who had loved her once deeply enough to keep a photograph of her for decades. Her mind drifted to her own life, the endless struggle to provide for her mother, the sacrifices she had made along the way. In many ways, she and Alexander weren't so different. They both carried burdens, fought battles others couldn't see. Maybe that's why she felt drawn to him, even though logic told her they lived in completely different worlds. The next morning, Emily woke up with a newfound determination. She decided to dig deeper into her mother's past, hoping to uncover more pieces of the puzzle. At the same time, she couldn't ignore the growing bond between her and Alexander. Whether it was fate or coincidence, their paths had crossed for a reason. And as daunting as it seemed, Emily knew she couldn't turn away now. Little did she know, this was just the start of a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and second chances. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Emily. Her mind was constantly tangled in thoughts of Alexander and the story he had shared. It felt surreal, like stepping into a movie where her own life was being rewritten before her eyes. She couldn't stop thinking about her mother, Sophia, and the secrets she had carried quietly all these years. What else had she hidden? And why? Every spare moment, Emily found herself digging through old boxes in the attic, searching for anything that might give her more answers. There were stacks of photo albums, dusty journals, and faded letters tied with brittle ribbons. Each item seemed to hold a fragment of her mother's past, but nothing directly linked to Alexander. Still, Emily kept going, driven by a mix of curiosity and a deep longing to understand the woman who had shaped her life. One evening, as she flipped through an old journal, something caught her eye, a small envelope tucked between the pages. Inside was a letter written in delicate handwriting. The date at the top was from nearly 30 years ago. Emily's hands trembled as she unfolded it and began to read. The letter was addressed to someone named Alex. Her breath hitched. Could it be him? The words poured out like a confession, filled with raw emotion. Sophia wrote about how much she missed him, how hard it was to move on after he left without saying goodbye. She admitted feeling lost and betrayed, but also acknowledged that she understood why he had gone. "You chased your dreams," the letter read, "and I admired you for it. But sometimes, I wonder what our lives would have been like if things had turned out differently." Emily sat there for a long time staring at the letter. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized just how deeply her mother had loved Alexander, and how much pain his departure must have caused her. For the first time, she saw Sophia not just as her mother, but as a young woman with hopes, fears, and heartbreaks of her own. Meanwhile, Alexander couldn't shake off the encounter either. He had tried to put it behind him, burying himself in work as he always did when emotions threatened to overwhelm him. But no matter how many meetings he attended or deals he negotiated, his thoughts kept drifting back to Emily. There was something about her resilience, her quiet strength that reminded him so much of Sophia. Yet she was undeniably her own person, fiercely independent and unafraid to ask tough questions. He started visiting the restaurant more often, though he told himself it was purely coincidental. Each time he made sure to sit in Emily's section, ordering the same steak and red wine. Sometimes they exchanged a few words, other times he simply watched her from afar, marveling at how effortlessly she handled the chaos around her. She moved with purpose, balancing trays of food while offering warm smiles to customers. It was clear she loved her job, not because it was glamorous, but because it gave her a sense of purpose. One night, as Emily cleared his table, Alexander decided to break the silence. "How is your mother doing?" he asked, his voice soft. Emily paused, surprised by the question. "She's holding on," she replied cautiously, "but it's getting harder. The treatments aren't working as well as they used to." Alexander nodded, his expression somber. "I'm sorry to hear that." After a moment, he added, "If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know." Emily hesitated. She wanted to refuse. He was practically a stranger after all. But something in his tone stopped her. It wasn't pity or obligation. It was genuine concern. Still, pride got the better of her. "Thank you," she said, forcing a smile. "But we're managing." Alexander didn't push further. Instead, he changed the subject. "You mentioned you've been looking into some of your mother's old things." Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Yeah, how did you know?" "I could tell," he said with a faint smile. "You have that look, like you're piecing together a puzzle." She chuckled softly, relaxing a little. "Something like that. I found this letter she wrote to you. Did you ever get it?" His face fell, and for a brief moment he looked almost vulnerable. "No," he admitted. "I never did." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Emily spoke up. "Why are you really here?" she asked bluntly. "Is it just because of my mom? Or is there something else?" Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, I don't know," he confessed. "At first it was curiosity. I wanted to see if you were anything like her. But now..." He trailed off, unsure of how to finish. "Now what?" Emily prompted, her gaze steady. "Now I think I admire you," he said quietly. "You remind me of her, yes. But you're extraordinary in your own right. You work so hard even when life keeps throwing obstacles your way. That kind of strength, it's rare." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, with such sincerity and admiration. For a moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to have someone like Alexander in her corner, someone who truly believed in her. But reality quickly snapped her back. "I appreciate the kind words," she said, her tone guarded. "But I don't need anyone's charity. I'm doing fine on my own." "I know," Alexander replied quickly, "and I respect that. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering support, if you'll let me." Emily didn't respond right away. She picked up his empty plate and turned to leave, but not before glancing back over her shoulder. "Let me think about it," she said softly. As the weeks went by, their interactions became less formal and more natural. Alexander continued to visit the restaurant, and Emily found herself looking forward to their conversations. They talked about everything, from their favorite books to their biggest fears. Slowly but surely, a bond formed between them, built on mutual respect and understanding. But outside the cozy confines of the restaurant, trouble was brewing. Word spread among the staff about Alexander's frequent visits, and rumors began to circulate. Some thought Emily was using him for money, while others accused her of trying to climb the social ladder. The gossip reached its peak when a local tabloid published a blurry photograph of them talking at the restaurant, speculating about a secret romance. Emily was devastated. She had worked so hard to maintain her dignity, and now people were tearing her down based on lies. Customers started treating her differently, some with disdain, others with awkward sympathy. Even her co-workers gave her sideways glances, whispering behind her back. When Alexander heard about the article, he immediately called Emily. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "I'm fine," she lied, though her voice cracked slightly. "It's just exhausting, you know? Everyone judging me without knowing the truth." "I can make this go away," Alexander offered. "A single statement from me and they'll drop the story." "No," Emily said firmly. "I don't want special treatment. Let them say what they want. I won't let it define me." Her determination impressed him even more. "You're stronger than most people give you credit for," he said sincerely. "Maybe," she replied with a small smile. "But strength doesn't mean I'm invincible. Sometimes it just means I keep moving forward, even when it hurts." Despite the challenges, Emily refused to let the negativity break her. She threw herself into her work, channeling her frustration into productivity. And whenever things felt overwhelming, she reminded herself of the lessons she'd learned from her mother: kindness, perseverance, and grace under pressure. Through it all, Alexander remained a constant presence in her life. He may have come into her world unexpectedly, but he had become someone she could lean on when the weight of everything threatened to crush her. Little did either of them know, their connection was about to be tested in ways neither could anticipate. The tension between Emily and Alexander grew thicker with each passing day. The tabloid story had blown up faster than either of them expected, turning what was once a quiet connection into public fodder. Headlines screamed things like, "Billionaire, CEO courts poor waitress," and "Love across class lines, a modern fairy tale." It was ridiculous, exaggerated nonsense, but the damage was done. People were talking, everywhere. At the restaurant, Emily felt the sting of judgment more acutely than ever. Customers who used to greet her warmly now avoided eye contact or whispered behind menus. Some even complained to management about her unprofessional behavior, as if simply being seen with Alexander made her unfit for her job. Her co-workers weren't much better. They snickered when she passed by, making sarcastic comments about her new lifestyle. One waitress even muttered loud enough for her to hear, "Must be nice to have a sugar daddy." Emily bit her tongue every time, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crack. She knew they didn't understand her situation, or care to. All they saw was a rich man and a struggling woman, and their minds immediately jumped to the worst conclusions. But inside it hurt. Every insult, every sideways glance chipped away at her confidence. Still, she reminded herself why she worked so hard. For her mother, for stability, for dignity. She wouldn't let anyone take that from her. Meanwhile, Alexander wasn't faring much better. His company faced its own storm of controversy. A rival business, eager to exploit his sudden vulnerability, leaked allegations of unethical practices within one of his subsidiaries. Whistleblowers came forward, accusing executives under him of cutting corners on safety regulations to boost profits. While Alexander himself hadn't directly been involved, the scandal cast a shadow over his entire empire. Reporters hounded him for statements, shareholders demanded answers, and his carefully polished image began to crumble. For the first time in years, Alexander felt out of control. He prided himself on being meticulous, calculating every move to ensure success, but now everything seemed to spiral beyond his grasp. And then there was Emily. As much as he admired her strength, he couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at him. Was his presence in her life causing more harm than good? Was he dragging her into his mess? One evening, after another grueling day of Meetings and media scrutiny, Alexander decided to visit the restaurant again. He needed to see Emily, to talk to her, to ground himself in something real amidst the chaos. But when he walked in, the atmosphere felt different. The air was heavy, charged with tension. Emily spotted him right away, and for the first time she hesitated before approaching his table. "Hi," she said softly, forcing a smile. "The usual?" Alexander nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Actually, can we talk for a minute?" he asked, lowering his voice. "Privately?" Emily glanced around nervously. Normally, she would have agreed without hesitation, but lately even stepping outside the kitchen felt like walking into a minefield. Still, she nodded and led him to a quiet corner near the back of the restaurant. "What's going on?" she asked once they were alone. "You look exhausted." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "Things are falling apart," he admitted. "My company, my reputation. It's all unraveling. I don't know how to fix it." Emily listened intently, her heart aching for him. Despite everything, she couldn't help but feel protective of this man who had opened up to her in ways no one else ever had. "You'll figure it out," she said firmly. "You always do." "It's not just that," he continued, his voice strained. "I keep thinking about you, about us. Being connected to me isn't helping your situation, it's making it worse. Maybe it's better if I step back for a while." Emily froze, her chest tightening. She should have expected this, shouldn't she? After all, Alexander had built his life on strategy and self-preservation. Stepping away would make sense for him. It would protect his interests and shield her from further gossip. But hearing him say it still stung. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. "You're just going to disappear again?" "It's not about disappearing," he insisted. "It's about doing what's right for both of us. You deserve better than this circus I've brought into your life." Anger bubbled up inside, her sharp and sudden. "Don't you dare decide what's best for me," she snapped. "I'm not some fragile flower who needs protecting. I've been handling tough situations my whole life, long before you showed up. If you want to run because things got hard, fine. But don't act like you're doing it for me." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched taut, filled with unspoken emotions and unresolved questions. Finally, Alexander broke it. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't get to decide what's best for you, but I also can't stand by and watch you suffer because of me. Not again." Emily softened slightly, though her defenses remained high. "Look, I get it. You're scared. So am I. This whole thing has been overwhelming for both of us. But running away won't solve anything. Trust me, I know." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same resilience that had drawn him to her in the first place. Beneath the exhaustion and frustration, she was still standing tall, refusing to let anyone knock her down. It inspired him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. "You're stronger than I am," he murmured, almost to himself. "No," she corrected gently. "We're just strong in different ways. You've built an empire from scratch. That takes guts. Now it's time to fight for it." Her words lingered in the air, planting a seed of resolve in his mind. Maybe she was right. Maybe instead of running, he needed to face the challenges head-on, not just for himself, but for her too. Because deep down, he knew he couldn't walk away from her. Not completely. Over the next few days, Alexander threw himself into damage control. He addressed the allegations against his company with transparency, admitting mistakes where necessary and vowing to implement stricter ethical standards moving forward. It wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, angry phone calls, and moments of doubt. But slowly, he began to regain control of the narrative. At the same time, Emily found her own way to push back against the negativity surrounding her. Inspired by her mother's artistic spirit, she started painting again. Late at night, after her shifts at the restaurant, she'd set up a makeshift studio in her tiny apartment. With every brushstroke, she poured her frustrations, fears, and hopes onto the canvas. The paintings weren't perfect, they were raw and messy just like life, but they carried a piece of her soul. One evening, as she worked on a particularly vibrant piece, an idea struck her. What if she could turn her art into something more? Something that could help her mother, and maybe even inspire others? She began uploading photos of her work online, sharing her journey with anyone willing to listen. To her surprise, people responded. Strangers left encouraging comments, praising her talent and resilience. Within weeks, her social media following grew exponentially. Then came the breakthrough. A local gallery owner reached out, offering to feature her work in an upcoming exhibition. Emily couldn't believe it. All those late nights, all the struggles, it was finally paying off. When Alexander heard about the opportunity, he couldn't hide his pride. "You're incredible, you know that?" he told her during one of their rare phone calls. "Don't sound so shocked," she teased, though her cheeks flushed with pleasure. "I've always been capable. You just helped remind me of that." Their relationship remained complicated, but it was evolving. They were learning to navigate the challenges together, supporting each other without losing sight of who they were individually. For the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make this work. Not as Billionaire and Waitress, but as two people trying to build something meaningful amidst the chaos. The gallery exhibition was set for a Friday evening, and Emily couldn't shake the mix of excitement and nerves swirling inside her. This wasn't just about showcasing her art. It felt like stepping into uncharted territory, putting herself out there in a way she never had before. For years, she'd played it safe, focusing on survival rather than dreams. But now, standing at the edge of something new, she wondered if she was ready. Alexander noticed her anxiety during their brief phone calls leading up to the event. "You're going to be amazing," he reassured her one night, his voice steady and encouraging. "People are already talking about your work. Just breathe and let yourself shine." "Easier said than done," Emily replied with a nervous laugh. "What if I mess it up? What if no one shows up?" "They will," he said firmly. "Trust me." Despite his confidence, Emily couldn't help but doubt. The last few months had been a roller coaster, between her mother's health struggles, the tabloid drama, and Alexander's own battles. She'd learned that life rarely went according to plan. Still, she reminded herself why she was doing this, not for fame or validation, but to honor her mother's legacy and create something meaningful from the chaos. The night of the exhibition arrived, and the gallery buzzed with energy. Strangers mingled under soft lighting, sipping wine as they admired the paintings displayed along the walls. Each piece told a story, some vibrant and hopeful, others dark and introspective. In the center of the room stood Emily, dressed in a simple black dress, her hands clasped tightly together as she greeted visitors. She recognized a few familiar faces, her manager from the restaurant, a couple of regular customers who had always been kind to her. But most of the crowd was made up of strangers. Some were art enthusiasts, while others seemed curious about the waitress-turned-artist making waves online. Emily tried to smile and engage, but her mind kept drifting to one person who hadn't yet arrived. "Looking for someone," a voice asked behind her. Emily turned to see Alexander walking toward her, impeccably dressed as always, but with a warmth in his eyes that softened his usual guarded demeanor. Relief washed over her, and for a moment she forgot about the crowd around them. "You came," she said softly, her voice tinged with gratitude. "Of course I did," he replied, offering her a small smile. "Did you think I'd miss this?" "I wasn't sure," she admitted. "Things have been complicated." He nodded, understanding flashing in his gaze. "I know. But tonight isn't about complications. It's about celebrating you." His words grounded her, reminding her why she was here. As the evening unfolded, Emily found herself relaxing, enjoying conversations with people who genuinely appreciated her work. Several collectors expressed interest in purchasing her paintings, and by the end of the night, nearly all of them had sold. But what surprised Emily most was discovering that one of her biggest supporters was none other than Alexander himself. He had quietly purchased several pieces, including a large canvas depicting a young woman sitting beneath a tree, sketchpad in hand. The painting was titled Dreams Deferred, inspired by her mother's unfulfilled aspirations. When Emily confronted him later, her tone was equal parts amused and touched. "Why didn't you tell me you were buying my art?" she asked. "I wanted it to be a surprise," he explained, shrugging slightly. "Besides, I figured you wouldn't accept help directly, so this felt like a better option." "It's not charity, right?" she teased, raising an eyebrow. "No," he said earnestly. "It's admiration. Your talent speaks for itself. For the first time in weeks, Emily allowed herself to fully embrace the moment. She realized how far she'd come, not just as an artist, but as a person. The struggles hadn't disappeared, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they fueled her creativity, pushing her to grow in ways she never imagined. After the exhibition, Emily and Alexander spent more time together, their bond deepening with each passing day. They talked openly about their fears, their hopes, and the scars they carried from their pasts. Alexander confessed how much he admired Emily's resilience, not just in facing life's challenges, but in refusing to let bitterness take root. "You inspire me to be better," he admitted, one evening as they strolled through Central Park. "To fight for what's right even when it's hard." Emily smiled, though her expression remained thoughtful. "And you remind me that strength doesn't mean going it alone. Sometimes it means leaning on others when we need help." Their connection was undeniable, but both knew it wasn't without its challenges. Society still judged them harshly. A billionaire CEO and a struggling waitress didn't fit neatly into any conventional narrative. Yet neither cared much anymore. They had weathered enough storms to know that love in its purest form transcended labels and expectations. Meanwhile, Emily continued using her platform to advocate for causes close to her heart. Inspired by her own experiences, she began speaking out about workers' rights, highlighting the struggles faced by those in low-wage jobs. Her message resonated with many, earning her invitations to speak at events and interviews with local media outlets. One afternoon, as she prepared for a panel discussion on workplace equity, Alexander joined her at her apartment. "Nervous?" he asked, watching her rehearse her speech. "A little," she admitted, "but also excited. If sharing my story can make even a small difference, then it's worth it." "That's what makes you extraordinary," he said, his tone filled with admiration. "You turn pain into purpose." His words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. On the day of the panel, Emily delivered her speech with passion and conviction, drawing applause from the audience. As she stepped off stage, Alexander greeted her with a proud smile. "You did great," he said simply. "Thanks," she replied, her cheeks flushing slightly. "But I couldn't have done it without you." They shared a quiet moment, their eyes locking in silent understanding. Neither needed to say it aloud. They were stronger together than apart. As weeks turned into months, Emily and Alexander worked side by side to rebuild not only their lives, but also their trust in humanity. Alexander implemented sweeping reforms within his company, prioritizing ethics over profit, and ensuring fair treatment for employees at every level. Emily, meanwhile, poured her earnings from the art sales into her mother's medical care, finally, easing some of the financial burden. Through it all, they leaned on each other, finding solace in shared laughter and late-night conversations. Their relationship wasn't perfect. It still required effort and compromise, but it was real. And in a world often driven by superficiality, that authenticity meant everything. One evening, as they sat together on a park bench overlooking the city skyline, Emily turned to Alexander with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if our paths hadn't crossed?" she asked. "All the time," he admitted. "But I think about it less as a what if, and more as a reminder of how lucky I am that they did." Emily smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "Me too." In that moment, surrounded by the hum of the city and the promise of tomorrow, they both knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. Not because fate had written their story for them, but because they had chosen to write it together, one brushstroke, one step, one heartbeat at a time. The months that followed were transformative, not just for Emily and Alexander, but for the people around them too. Their lives had become intertwined in ways neither could have predicted, each decision they made rippling outward and touching others' lives in unexpected ways. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of doubt, tension, and fear. But through it all, they clung to the belief that their partnership, built on trust, respect, and shared values, was worth fighting for. Emily's art continued to gain recognition, not just locally but nationally. Her paintings told stories of resilience, love, and hope, resonating with audiences from all walks of life. Galleries began reaching out, offering her opportunities she'd never dreamed possible. Yet despite the growing acclaim, she stayed grounded. Every time someone praised her work, she thought of her mother, the woman who had inspired so much of it, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. One day, as Emily prepared for another exhibition, she received an email from a prestigious art school. They wanted to feature one of her pieces in a special showcase dedicated to emerging artists. The painting they chose was Dreams Deferred, the same one Alexander had purchased months earlier. When Emily told him about it, his face lit up with pride. "Looks like your mom's legacy is reaching even more people," he said, his voice warm. "She'd be so proud of you." Emily nodded, her throat tightening with emotion. "I think about her every time I pick up a brush," she admitted. "It's like she's guiding me, telling me to keep going no matter what." Alexander reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "And look how far you've come." Meanwhile, Alexander's efforts to reform his company were paying off. The changes he implemented, fair wages, transparent policies, and a renewed focus on employee well-being, earned him praise from both employees and industry leaders. Though some critics dismissed his actions as a PR stunt, those closest to him knew better. This wasn't about saving face. It was about doing the right thing. 1. Evening after a particularly grueling board meeting, Alexander found Emily waiting for him outside his office building. She held 2 cups of coffee, steam curling into the chilly night air. He smiled faintly as he approached her. "You didn't have to wait for me," he said, accepting the cup gratefully. "I wanted to," she replied simply. "How did it go?" he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "About as well as expected. Some folks are resistant to change, but we're making progress." "That's all that matters," Emily said firmly. "You're proving that success doesn't have to come at someone else's expense." Her unwavering support meant the world to him. For years, he'd carried the weight of his empire alone, convinced that vulnerability was a weakness. Now, with Emily by his side, he realized strength lay in leaning on others when needed. As spring gave way to summer, Emily decided to organize a charity event to raise funds for underprivileged workers. Drawing inspiration from her own struggles, she envisioned a night where art, music, and community came together to support those in need. Alexander immediately offered to help, using his resources to secure a venue and promote the event. On the evening of the fundraiser, the hall was packed with guests eager to contribute. Local musicians performed heartfelt songs, while Emily's paintings adorned the walls, each piece accompanied by a story of perseverance. As attendees mingled, bidding generously in a silent auction, Emily stood back and watched, overwhelmed by the turnout. "This is incredible," Alexander murmured beside her, his arm brushing hers lightly. "You've created something truly special." "It's not just me," she corrected softly. "Everyone here believes in the cause. That's what makes it powerful." By the end of the night, they had raised enough money to provide scholarships for low-income students pursuing careers in the arts, a dream Emily had once cherished but been forced to set aside. As she thanked the volunteers and organizers, tears welled up in her eyes. This was proof that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark meaningful change. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Alexander grew closer than ever. Their relationship evolved naturally, built on mutual admiration and a shared commitment to making the world a better place. They weren't perfect. They argued occasionally, challenged each other's perspectives, and sometimes stumbled. But they always found their way back to understanding. One quiet afternoon, as they sat together in Emily's apartment, Alexander pulled out a small envelope. I've been meaning to give this to you, he said, handing it over. Curious, Emily opened it and found a photograph inside. It was a portrait, her mother, painted by Emily herself, standing beneath a tree with sunlight streaming through the leaves. Beneath the image was an inscription, "To Sophia, whose dreams continue to inspire." Tears sprang to Emily's eyes as she looked up at him. "When did you do this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I commissioned it a while ago," he explained. "I thought it might be nice to have something tangible to remember her by, something that reflects her spirit." Emily hugged him tightly, overcome with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means everything." As autumn rolled around, Emily and Alexander attended another art exhibition, this time featuring works inspired by personal histories. As they wandered through the gallery, Emily paused in front of a painting that caught her eye. It depicted two figures walking hand in hand along a winding path, surrounded by vibrant colors and swirling patterns. "What do you think it means?" Alexander asked, studying the piece. "To me, it looks like a journey," Emily replied thoughtfully. "Two people navigating life's twists and turns, supporting each other along the way." Alexander smiled, taking her hand in his. "Sounds familiar." They lingered there for a moment, lost in the beauty of the artwork and the symbolism it represented. Neither needed to say it aloud. They both knew their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, moments of uncertainty, and perhaps even heartache. But as long as they faced them together, they believed they could overcome anything. Later, that evening, as they walked home beneath a canopy of stars, Emily turned to Alexander with a soft smile. "Do you ever feel like we're exactly where we're supposed to be?" she asked. "All the time," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. "And I wouldn't trade it for anything." In that moment, surrounded by the hum of the city and the promise of tomorrow, they both knew they had found something rare and precious, a love rooted in authenticity, strengthened by adversity, and bound by a shared vision for the future. Whatever lay ahead, they were ready to face it, together.